Great. All right. So thank you everyone for coming here. And thank you for being at our first webinar for the Facility Condition Assessments and ADA Reports Learning. I am so glad that you are all here today. If you haven't met me yet, I'm Sarah Kirkpatrick. I'm the SASI Grant Coordinator, which stands for the Supporting America School Infrastructure Grant. And that is the grant that is paying for part of these contracts, as well as paying my salary to do these trainings. With me, I have some great partners. So my first partner is Scott. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Scott Rogers. I have two roles, actually. So I'm a project executive with the Winahawk Group. We're a construction management firm based in the Pacific Northwest. I'm actually based out of Pendleton. But in addition to that, as Sarah has noted here, I also have the pleasure and distinction of serving as a longtime board member for the Athena Weston School District. We are about 20 miles north of Pendleton in eastern Umatilla County. We're a district of about 500 students K-12. So kind of a different perspective in the sense that I approach this from both the lens of a board member and information that is relevant to a board member and district administration, as well as that of a third-party outside consultant. So, Sarah, I appreciate the time and energy that you put into this and your support, and also the opportunity to just kind of speak through it from my lens. So, thank you.
You're very welcome. Andy?
Yeah, my name's Andy Chastain. I'm the facilities manager for the Medford School District, and I'm glad to be a part of this. We're looking forward to getting our assessment and plugging it into our maintenance plan. Ron got called away. He won't be able to be with us, but we'll do what we can.
Great, thank you. And Adam, sorry, had you go last. Or did he step away?
Okay. Hi. Hey, everybody. Adam Krein. I'm the statewide facility assessment program administrator. So I'll be working alongside Sarah with supporting you guys with, helping understand this information and scheduling the facility assessments with the contractor.
Thank you, Adam. So a real quick outline of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about getting these reports from ODE, how you read the FCA report, how to read the ADA report, how to prioritize your maintenance, how to communicate these reports with your community and the board, what we're doing with this data, and then a little quick funding, what I have so far on our SASI site, and then time for an open discussion and questions. So first we'll talk about getting the reports from ODE, and there's multiple parts. There's the drafts, there's reviewing, and there's the final reports. So first, we're going to send you the draft report folder. You'll receive an email either from Adam or I with a link to a folder that's in our OneDrive. And this link will remain. It shouldn't go away as long as ODE is using Microsoft products. So we have a little link with your folder. You'll open it up, and we'll be putting drafts of the FCA and the ADA in it. You might have received all of yours so far. You might not have received them yet. You can always check in with us and see, hey, how come we haven't gotten this one yet? That is fine. But as BV finishes those drafts, I'm uploading them in the folder. So if you had, say, your elementary school was done first, it might take a few more days for your high school to show up because it hasn't gotten done, finished yet. Once you receive that draft folder, then you can go to reviewing. So we'll give you about 2 weeks to review those draft reports. And on that email, we attach an optional checklist for help. So if you're someone that likes to check off, did they do this correct? Like you like lists, like I do, then we have that there. If you don't need lists, that's fine. It's optional. Or if there's a lot of mistakes, you want to have something to write down those mistakes and keep track of it, you can also use that checkoff sheet to write those things down and then send it back to us. if you do find corrections that need to be made, just send it to Adam or I, and we will give that to BV. If you don't respond and you don't say anything at all about the drafts, we're assuming they're fine, and Adam will ask BV to create the final report. The final reports, again, will get an email linked on a folder. In that folder, we'll have another folder with your final reports, but also have other documents. So if you sent in a pre-survey analysis, that will be there. If you sent us your building list will be there. So there'll be other things within that folder. There we go. Let us know if additional people need permission. The only people that we allow to view that folder can actually view it. So if you need another administrator to take a look at those reports, just let us know and we can grant them access. If you have charter schools in your district, that again is the only way that they can get to those reports is if you give it to them or you grant them access to those reports. The reports are PDFs, they're downloadable. So once you download them, you can distribute them how you'd like. All right. Now I'm going to start with Scott.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And for the attendees today, I just want to say that I typically approach this in a very conversational, informal manner. So if anyone at any point in time has questions or comments for me, I might defer to Sarah, but please, by all means, use the function within the Teams app to just raise your hand. And I am glad to kind of have any discussion or follow-up conversation you'd like. Again, I take the same tact that I take this when I'm attending these versus presenting. I want to make this informal, I guess, informational for attendees and make sure you get information that you like. I do see that Jaron wrote a comment in. I guess, Sarah, I'll let you address anything through the chat feature as I kind of roll through my comments here. But I think the important thing to note here in particular is that these facility condition assessments, they're really, I want to be very clear, these are a snapshot in time of your facility as it was studied. So please note, especially if you're using these for the longer range facilities plan, that the information that you have is really a snapshot in time of your facility. So please make sure that that is taken into consideration, especially as the basis for a long-range master plan. But as you read these reports, as it's noted there, you're going to kind of get an executive summary, building chapters, and then the Appendix C and Appendix D. I would highly encourage you, if you haven't already, download the template spreadsheet that's in Microsoft Excel format that is available through the ODE website. And it'll let you and just familiarize yourself with what questions are they asking of my assessors. That gives you some visibility to what they're going to be looking at specifically as we get into some of the more soft elements, I would say. The ADA, indoor air quality, some of those components of it. It's just great to ensure that you as a facilities manager or somebody that's involved in the district's operations are familiar with what am I asking my consultant team to come and study. So kind of next slide, Sarah. This is a great piece of data. So the facility condition index calculation by building, it's a really kind of a good line in the sand, if you will. When you start looking through this data, and you can kind of see here's, there's information presented. How much is it per square foot? What's the replacement value? And then what's my current need, right? So over the next X number of years, 3, 5, 10, how much should I expect to spend on maintaining this facility, right? How much should I expect to spend in bringing it up to condition? And that I usually use it, I've done a fair number of facility assessments as well as long-range master plan processes for districts. And I usually, and again, it can be somewhat subjective, but 0.3, that 30%. So if you start kind of arriving at a number that is greater than a third of the value of the replacement, probably need to have a broader conversation about, is this a good use of my dollars to invest in this facility? But again, it's intended to be a snapshot. Now, it's not necessarily addressing what we call functional adequacy. Can the building deliver a 21st century education model? Rather, it's going to just tell you this existing facility, how much is it going to cost me to invest in it, to bring it up to date? up to code, if you will, with a modern facility. And I think that's one of the important parts that districts need to ensure that they're considering when they're weighing investments in existing facilities is this building still meeting the needs from an educational standpoint? But quite honestly, that's what the next phase of the work, the long range master plan, that helps kind of give you visibility into that question. But for today, again, just specifically to the condition assessment, it's really just a snapshot in time of the existing facility and how much would it cost essentially per system to upgrade those elements. So this is giving you some visibility as this project nears on. If we were using that $646 per square foot, gives you a replacement value. You know, in 10 years, that building's going to need to have roughly a third of an investment. So you need to have that conversation internally about where do we invest our dollars? Do we continue to invest in this facility, or do we need to have a longer range plan to kind of help address the needs of that building? Next slide, Sarah. So this is, I think, a key part. As you navigate through this, you're going to get different elements, right? So we know your structure, you know your building envelope, which is your roof, your wall assemblies, your windows. You also have a fair number of those internal components, your plumbing, your mechanical systems, your electrical. These are parts, quite honestly, as a board member myself, but also somebody that lives in the world of construction. These are often overlooked, and I think in particular, you know, if COVID taught us anything, it was the value of a good indoor air quality and our mechanical systems. And certainly from my own local district, it really highlighted that we had some pretty significant challenges with that. So I think that as you, as a facilities manager, start to look to upgrade, or if you get the FCA report and it notes that your mechanical system needs to be replaced, you know, I would also ensure that you're stepping back and looking at some of those other elements that help support that. You know, do I have enough electrical capacity, right? And if I'm looking to add air conditioning, you know, if I'm out in Wallowa County and maybe AC is not a huge issue, but, you know, I'm starting to get some pressures on the shoulder months, that May and September times of the year when it's warm enough that I could turn on the AC, I'm starting to impact my learning environment. Maybe I need to add air conditioning. One of the key parts of this FCA report, do you have enough electrical capacity? So what I like about the report is that gives you indication of what your key elements are, but also it's, again, intended to serve as a jumping off point as you start to look at some of these other potential improvements as far as your long range master plan. This, to me, is always fascinating. Again, as you, as a facilities manager or a district administrator, you're trying to balance the question of, do I replace or do I renovate? Back to that facility condition index, that percentage of target there, you start looking down the line here, you start to see some of these costs, particularly key infrastructure elements, plumbing, mechanical, all right, your electrical systems. All of these need to be taken into consideration across the board of what that cost might be. Now, from a budgetary standpoint, I think it's great to be able to kind of look at this and be like, you know, if I look at the example of my roofing, I know that in, you know, 11 to 20 years, there's $153,000 pending, right? You know, but are there other structural upgrades or significant seismic upgrades that I could perform as a result of that? Do I have to tear the roof off to do a mechanical upgrade? So again, just using the team that is presenting you this information to be pretty thoughtful about how you're planning out your long-range plan. Long-range planning as a result of that. And again, don't just look at this as a singular line item. Try to roll it up and look at it in a cohesive, comprehensive across the district's role there. And if you start to look at some of these projected needs in the future, just ask yourself or ask your team, are there other costs that I need to be thoughtful of, or are there other scopes of work that need to ensure that I'm capturing here? Again, back to the example, if I got to upgrade my electrical because it's, or my mechanical because I've only got 10 years projected, is my electrical infrastructure in a place to support that or not? You know, so again, just being thoughtful and using this information as a tool to determine, is it a go, no go on investing in your existing facilities? At Athena Weston, all of our facilities are aged. Our quote youngest building is from the late 70s. And as a result of that, we typically have a lot of these conversations on a fairly frequent basis. So again, just let it be your guide when you start to craft that question of, how am I budgeting? Am I investing in this building? And if the answer is yes, I'm going to invest in it, is this the best use of my monies? And do I need to touch other systems as a result of that? Next question, next slide, Tim. This graph always gives me a little angst, right? So again, back to the notion of how much am I going to have to invest in this facility in the future? And do I use it as a budgetary, or do I use it as the catalyst to determine, do I retain this facility? Again, I'll go back to my own local district. You know, the notion of trying to pass a bond and replace a building for $30 million in a district of less than 500, that's a tough math problem for a community. So again, we are typically having to invest in aged facilities that we otherwise might not, but it gives us visibility. Again, what I like about this slide from a budgetary standpoint, you know, here we are 10 years in the future. I need to make sure that that blue bar on the far end, I got to make sure that I've got that budgeted, or I have another game plan for it. Again, if you're trying to build your capital projects budget or consider a bond in your future, this type of math helps kind of solidify your decision making and your budgeting process as a result of that. So it's a wonderful tool for budgeting, particularly with your business manager in the mix. This to me is the value of your on-site assessment team. Now, I want to be cautious, right? A lot of this can be totally subjective. There's some hard data in here, right? You can see the quantity. So I don't know how many have had the opportunity to kind of go through an assessment process themselves, or actually review the spreadsheet that is produced as a result of that. But you get a lot of this data, right? And it's split up by building, you know, what's your roof type like, what's your wall assembly like, what's your flooring type like. So there's kind of objective data again. You know, in this example, you've got your structure, A1010 throughout building, right? So you have a foundation system, concrete with continuous footings, 255 lineal feet. Now, the notion of that is that it's been deemed to be fair. So when I look at a foundation, as it's settled, is it cracking? Is there any noticeable rebar protruding from it? That would, to me, very much warrant a, you know, probably unfair or a need to be further investigated or potentially, in the worst case, replaced. But here it's considered fair. So probably not a lot of cost there. Structural framing, again, just these are key infrastructure systems that you typically don't, if you're having issues with this, you've got a bigger problem with that building. So if I saw a condition for structure or some of these elements, then to me, there would be a bit of a more red flag. On some of the building exterior elements, those elements that are, I would just say, replaceable, roofing, windows, finishes, I'm not as concerned with some of the elements, if you will, in terms of what their condition are, because those can be replaced easily. But structure, that's a little bit more work, right? So if we look down this facade, the building exterior walls have metal siding to them. That's a pretty durable product, right? So you know that you have good longevity to it. Your exterior glazing, your windows, right? Some of these you start to get into a bit of a slippery slope about the need to replace, also weighed out with the potential gain for energy and utility savings. So don't shy away when you see some of this information, specifically on glazing or anything that you know you could insulate or upgrade. Do I have potential for energy incentives? You know, those that are eligible for the Energy Trust of Oregon, or your own local utility co-op in some cases. But also with the notion of that, you know that they're gonna fail at some point in time, and it's time to replace them. Exterior doors, overhead door. So this is all great information, again, to kind of take, but put it in context. When I look at these two items, again, I've got structural framing on a foundation system. That should be good for the life of the building, unless there's significant issues. The facade, that is typically items that can be replaced with a good design partner and competent contractor. And again, with the intention that you may be able to pick up some additional utility savings as a result of that. And again, sorry, Sarah, you can slow my roll here if I'm going too fast. So this, again, I'm kind of a data nerd myself. So, oh, you can go ahead and jump ahead. Sorry. This goes back to that how do I fold this information in and start to kind of determine, like, what is a good investment, right? So when I look through this, I got a lifespan and the age is 29, right? How many years do I have left? It's probably time to start be thinking about replacing those items. But again, I want to be thoughtful as you start to look through this and start to assess what is the lifespan of these items? What's the age from when they were last installed? You know, in some cases, a piece of mechanical equipment, that poor bathroom fan in your underused locker room, that thing will just limp along for 50 years, right? Should it be? Not every piece of equipment is as lucky as that. And in particular, your major infrastructure systems, your mechanical, your plumbing, your electrical switchgear, they all have a useful life. And especially as you start to look to upgrade, you got to add air conditioning. You have a much larger electrical load based upon all the technology and related access control systems. Just being thoughtful about the existing infrastructure, the age of it, but also what do you intend to do with this building over the next 5, 10, maybe even 20 years, and step back and not just look at individual elements, that one single, electrical item, but maybe is your entire electrical infrastructure up to the task for the next chapter of this building's life. Okay. Making sure I get all my notes here. Okay. Any questions before I move off of these items that are more like the brick and mortar elements? Not seeing any there. Let's jump into reading the ADA report. I just want to kind of start with the notion, as a board member myself, but certainly the tack that I take with facility assessments, I really ask myself, can the public, can members of the community access my facilities with grace and dignity? And that's usually where I start with an ADA assessment. So I start in the parking lots, right? Like I start outside of the building and work my way in. So under the obligation element, sorry, not quite yet. Under that obligation element, that's usually the tack that I take. Can the members of the public access this facility, their facility, with grace and dignity? The barrier priority definitions, ADA calls out pretty specifically. There's 4 that they quantify. One is kind of a mixed bag, but accessible, approach, and entrance. Again, can people get into my facilities, access to goods and services? Can I deliver education? Can I give them access to instructional space? Access to public restrooms. When a member of the public comes to utilize the gym for a wrestling event or a basketball game, can they get into the gym? Can they get into the building? Can they get into the gym? Can they use the restrooms? Can they go to the concession stand, the snack shack? So again, grace and dignity being kind of the key driver from the lens that I see it. And then I think in particular, as you as a district, if you're considering a bond program at some point in time in the future, it's key to know that have the members of your public been in your buildings? So again, with the notion of providing people access. The barrier summary table and costs, right? Like we're going to look through that and get some indication of what the cost is to upgrade that. And then I think the campus needs element, right? But these are all great conversations to have, particularly with a broader community group. Next slide. This to me is, and I'll just be honest, this is the value of a good architect, right? So as you as a district, in particular, when you look at your facilities and you get the facility condition assessment, again, that's a snapshot of the here and the now. That's going to flag for you. And again, I highly encourage you, the ODE spreadsheet that you can download. It gives you a multiple of items to kind of walk through. And even before you get an assessment or have an assessment team on site, your facilities manager or your, a building level administrator, just print that document out and just walk the space. Walk around the exterior, walk the interior. You're going to flag some of these items, I suspect, well before you get an assessment team on site. And maybe it's something that you've already done and have got some steps in place to kind of address some of your deficiencies before the members of the public do. But I think it's always good practice. And again, with the intention of these are the public's facilities. And I really try to ensure that the public has good access to these buildings. Now, I would just say these 3 bullet points, this is good information to have. In particular, I would say that this is what I highly rely on an architect on. And the big part of that is back to the, if we look at this first bullet point, right? If any of these facilities are built prior to 92, right? And again, I'll use my own district as an example of that. All of our facilities are. So any potential improvement or need that we're thinking about, we have to take into context of not just if we want to improve the restrooms at our, middle school gym. It also needs to be with the notion of, are we addressing any ADA compliance as a result of that? But anybody that can do a code analysis for you specifically on this, it's great to kind of help align and guide where you're going to make your investment as you improve these facilities. I would also encourage you, if you don't have an architect, get your local building official. Typically, a building official is glad to have a conversation and maybe give you some guidance on what is and is not a legitimate ADA need. But I've always found a authority having jurisdiction, a local building official, more than willing to at least engage with me. Hey, if I'm going to improve this entrance, I'm going to remove this concrete that has been severely, spalled because of the use of ice melt. Now I've got to improve it. What other ADA requirements may kick in as a result of those code changes? Usually it's driven by a percentage of the overall improvement in the facility. But some of it you may just want to do out of, again, being thoughtful about, I don't have to do it, but I'm going to do it for just code analysis sake. And then I think importantly, as you start to kind of coalesce around this, and again, with the intention being that you may or may not want to move it towards a potential bond program, this is always something that I've seen districts get caught on, right? Like they know they want to upgrade or do some changes, but they hadn't necessarily taken into consideration the percentage of improvements, and it may necessitate a building-wide ADA upgrade or something similar. So just be thoughtful as you're starting to look at your facilities and you get these reports back. Make sure that you're taking into consideration across the district, across the facility, what other potential improvements as a result may be required to meet ADA needs. So this slide, if anything, to me, just emphasized, get a good architect in the mix. And as you start to have conversations about your improvements, just make sure that you're either talking to your building official or talking to your architect about, hey, if I'm going to do X, Y, or Z, am I going to have to do any other ADA upgrades as a result of that? Next slide, please. Now, this is, again, I think that template document that the ODE makes available is a great place to start. And all of these items are called out pretty clearly within that. So again, back to that barrier priority, number one that's listed on the slide previous, it references accessible approach and entrance, access to goods and services, access to public restroom, and quote, any other measures necessary. A water fountain might be an example of that, or good clearance under a kitchen sink. So when I go through that, these items that are called out here to me are very clearly in alignment with those priorities, but also to ODE's credit, very clearly in alignment with their template spreadsheet. So just walk through this. I wouldn't get too specific to these items here, but more to, I think, to give some example of what are the potential barriers here? And if somebody rolls up on my site, can they park? Is there clearly defined ADA parking? Do they have clearance if they have a wheelchair to get out of their van? And is there a ramp that meets the ramp requirements to get into my space? Now, one of the things, and I'll just use a recent example, school district here in Northeast Oregon, they had challenges with ADA getting into a gym. They didn't have any clearly defined ADA parking, so we addressed that. But one of the challenges was it's a pretty tight site. We did not have enough room to do a full ADA compliant ramp system within the facility. So we had to put a little lift in the front foyer and then also provide ramp access around the exterior. Not ideal, but it was the only way to make it work without a massive overhaul of the building. So again, we knew that there were deficiencies, identified them in the assessment. It took a pretty broad conversation with the long range facilities master planning committee on what aligned with the committee's goals and recommendation that would also satisfy the requirements and the notion of letting people gain access to the building with grace and dignity. Next slide, please, sir. These again, I want to use all of these as a notion of go through that ADA spreadsheet that ODE has, and then just really walk through it. These different priorities, again, can they use our space? Can they get into the building? All of these are called out pretty clearly within those barriers. The notion that, access to goods and services, this is, you see here under priority 3, access to public restrooms, right? So all of these, again, one of the districts we had visited, anybody that had a wheelchair had to physically be lifted. That wheelchair had 4 people. They had to lift it on each corner and carry it up a flight of stairs into the gymnasium. So that's pretty challenging, right? And so all of these elements to me just allow the public to get into your spaces on a graceful manner. So this to me, when I took this data and as I reviewed this in anticipation of today's conversation, I think it's good to have these kind of flagged with the notion of now I got to go out and implement these, right? But also, and I want to be thoughtful here, you know, if you're going to go in and touch some of these spaces to do your ADA upgrades, are there other improvements that you could be doing as a result of that? So if there's anything that can be taken out of the conversation today, it's just please don't take these elements in a vacuum. And I'm sure my other colleague here that'll speak specifically from what Medford's been doing, you know, when you take this data, where do you go with it, right? Like, how do I make these improvements? And again, with the notion of, are there other improvements? If I'm going to go in and upgrade a restroom to meet ADA requirements, should I also upgrade the toilet partitions and some of the other fixtures as a result of that? So you can best answer that, but, you know, just again, with the notion of, if I have to upgrade these to meet ADA requirements, are there other improvements that I should be doing as a result of that? And just making sure that your code official and or an architect in the mix have already kind of, you know, basically kicked those tires, if you will, to make sure that any needs that's being proposed is not just done in a vacuum or just kind of done one off. So this is kind of fascinating, and I would just want to give you some indication of that, right? So you can see that this is flagged here. So as I walk through these, and I'm just going to kind of talk through each of these elements from the lens of a project manager as a third party, right? Parking space slope is greater than 1/50, right? Greater than 2%. That's pretty significant, and likely something that you should get addressed. But, you can see you've got signage issues for the next couple. And then you've got exterior accessible, building entrance. So the first place I would probably go here is I would probably want to get my civil engineer into the mix. Hey, come help me plot out a course here. Do I need to saw cut out this asphalt? Is the asphalt already failing for the parking locations? And I need to replace it regardless. So again, with the notion of don't just jump into kind of playing whack-a-mole and going down your list, but I would really encourage you as a facilities manager or an administrator, step back and look at it with a broader view of what other improvements. Again, back to the notion of, maybe your concrete ramp is spalling and you need to replace it anyway. It doesn't meet, ADA code. Go ahead and just figure that out. And if you're going to address it, don't just do it and then have to, not clearly address the need, but do it with the intention of, I want to be good with my tax dollars and spread them around and address multiple issues here, as opposed to just playing whack-a-mole and going down. But all of these, to me, it's a good, thoughtful conversation with, again, like an architect, in some of these cases, a civil engineer, but certainly getting an architect to help you guide, hey, for the last item, for instance, right? I can't get an accessible door in this location. Well, do you have another accessible door that somebody that has a wheelchair can get access to? What does that look like? Or, in some cases, I need to address a secure entry vestibule regardless. I don't have a good, safe, and secure entry vestibule that routes traffic into my front lobby the way that I want it to, or the way that I have it at other sites in my district. Then let's capture all of those needs in addition to dealing with some of these other ADA barrier issues. And actually, I think, Sarah, if I've gone through this, yeah, this is the one that I think is key. So one of the items to just note here, so that second line item is got a $0 to it. And the biggest part of that is because the prior line item, that item above it, back to, again, not taking these items out of context and trying to just do them sort of in a bigger picture summary. You're going to address that second bullet point when you address the first bullet point. So that's why it's showing it as a $0 in that scenario. I think it actually bumps to Andy, but any questions or comments? I know I kind of pushed through that. It seems like somewhat brief, but Sarah, any questions from the group?
I don't see any, so go ahead, Andy.
Can you allow me to share my screen?
I can. Let me go find.
So I'm going to talk a bit about how just kind of our processes to get our long-term plan, how we're going to integrate these findings into our maintenance plan. Do you see my screen there? Do not.
Not.
I'm not seeing it yet, Andy.
Well,
There it goes.
there it is. All right. So this is we presented this up to the ASBOA conference here a few months ago. So I'm just going to go through some of these things that we talked over there. It was Ron Havner who did it there, who's our executive director of facilities and security and leadership development. But I just kind of took some of these slides that Sarah gave and then incorporated into what we do. So look, we get the ADA report. Now what? So how do we determine the campus needs? What should I do with those? Executive summary, significant issues and the different levels of that we need to address those things. How do they tie into our maintenance schedule and replacement during remodels or projects? And we'll go through a few examples of those as well. Why do we want to do this? Our facilities are a platform for effective teaching and learning spaces. We want to be responsible and show good stewardship with the tax dollars that the public has allowed us to work with. The Medford School District had a bond in 2007, I think it was 2007, 2008. Part of our agreement, our promise to the public then was we were going to maintain our buildings very well over the next several years, so we didn't have to live bond to bond. Deferred maintenance is expensive maintenance. If we can keep that preventative maintenance in line, then it makes we can push these things. We don't want to live bond to bond. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. And the schools are a cornerstone of our community. We have a lot of public gathering in them, and in our district anyway, the public uses them for all kinds of events. So we want to keep them looking nice and use these findings to help do that. Again, we don't want to live bond to bond because that is it makes we want to maintain our buildings as best as we can, so we're not going out every time we live on this. We want a maintenance pace, right? Where we know our facilities, we know what it takes to maintain them, so we're not falling into a valley of depletion, and then we have to bond again to bring them up to standards and so forth. So in Southern Oregon anyway, it's been difficult to pass a bond. This is a little map of the different bonds that have passed over the last few years, but we both us and the Grants Pass School District just to the west of us, northwest of us, were both denied last time we went out for a bond. So it's not something we can depend on. We want to be creative with our fund sources, and once we receive these reports, how are we going to implement them into our programs? So our budget process is in November. I meet as a facilities manager monthly with the secondary admin, go through our projects, which you'll see in a little bit, our project tracker, and make sure that I have a good idea of what their priorities are site-wise, each of our sites. And so in November, we start to meet and kind of refine these things. and go through their, reconcile their FTE, make sure it's all being used, anything that's left over that we can push to a different bucket, if you will. Also in November, we start looking at our building projects for the next year, the next fiscal cycle, which, as you probably know, doesn't line up with the normal cycle. So our fiscal year is July to June, and doesn't always work well for split year projects. But we try in November to start kind of defining our next year's projects and create a capital project list. In January and February, set the capital spending amounts. We do that through, we have some good partners, architects, contractors, project managers that we can tap. We also have a very good history of past projects. I keep a on our tracker, you'll see again in a minute, the past cost of every aspect of a project. So I can quickly pull up what it costs us to do HVAC replacement on a certain building, what it costs for the plumbing, electrical, HVAC, crane, everything's there. So I can pull it at my fingertips pretty quickly. And that's from our big seismic projects. We just did about a $40 million seismic project to a building next door to us. We track all that, so I can find that information. So we try to set those capital spending amounts in January, February, prioritize the spending and the projects. We're looking forward to these reports coming in, because it helps us to plug these things in our where we're deficient, in whether it's ADA or the FIC reports, to make sure that we are tracking them. It's like we talk about here, living the cobwebs in your own corner of your house. You know, you don't always see those because you live there, but it's nice to have a third party come in and point some of these things out that you may not see on a daily basis. In March, we agree on the priorities of those projects for the next fiscal year, the spending, and work through that with the superintendent. April, or lately it's been May, because of our budgeting processes and some negotiations that have been happening, we tried to deliver that proposal to the school board. They have a budget committee that goes through that. And then by June, we hope to have an approved budget by law. You know that we have to have that adopted by June 30th. We're hoping to have that by May, so that when school's out early June, we want to hit the ground running, having the contractors on board, the project managers, architects, engineers, all that has all been pre-done. So when school's out, it feels like we're kind of pushing students out the door so we can get busy a lot of times. Community input. This is one of the things that Sarah asked us to talk about. Going back to our middle school project, we had a 6th grade task force. This was a community-wide, district-wide necessity that we had 2 of the largest middle schools in the state. So we're trying to figure out how we're going to shrink the size of those. We determined we wanted to move the 6th graders into middle school, out of the elementary schools. And so we enlisted a 6th grade task force of about 50 community members who looked at our facilities. They worked along with the facility optimization committee and had them go out and look at our sites. Where do you see? What do you see? What conditions are they in? They came back and reported to the school board that their recommendation was that we use the current our current inventory. So we had a school next a site next door to our facilities department here that was South High School, and it was deemed, the narrative was that it was unsafe to put a high school in. So they lobbied for a new school we built, South Medford High School. So this facilities optimization committee was to do the legwork and found that this building was our best choice. So for another location. So moving all the 6th graders into a middle school meant we needed a 3rd school. We did this. We put together, of course, it impacts rezoning, all kinds of things. We put together an AZ committee of community members and school board members, facilities, our school staff, and we try to engage the community whenever possible, get them involved, have them give us their input, and then do our best to use that to to do what needs to be done. And we find that is very advantageous to us. When we went to our AZ committee, they had to rezone several of the sites, who's going where to what school, and from middle school all the way up through secondary school. We had not one complaint, not one protest. We had went through all the hoops months and months in advance, let the community members do the fact finding and present it to the school board. And when it was approved, there was not a protest one in the school board meeting. We do a Medford Unites once a quarter, where we invite the community to come in and see. We just finished a big seismic project at one of our elementary schools, seismic, HVAC, windows, and we invite them to come in and take a look. They've heard about it saw it on the news, seen it on social media. So we bring them in to say, here's what we did, and find that the more that they can see it with their own eyes, the less questions there are, the less negative things there are on social media, and the better response we get. So we have, when we did the middle school project here, we did probably 60 tours, from one-on-one tours to class reunions that were happening that summer. We'd bring them all in, split them up in groups, and take them through the site. And they had fun looking at the way the school used to be, and we're excited about the way that it was being upgraded seismically, and HVAC, new windows, all the things that go into that. So it really helps to get that community engagement and let them see what's going on. Don't just present a project and then it's kind of a mystery. We have went a long ways to try to mend, I guess you could say, a relationship between the city and the school district. Again, quarterly we meet with the city and we put out our projects on the table, the things that are coming, the things they're doing, how we can mesh them, how are our projects going to impact theirs, and vice versa. We invite the and that has been very advantageous for both parties. Our budget committee each year during the budget cycle is composed of several community members. And then again, there at the end, we do project tours. I like to go out when we're doing a project, HVAC project. We did a boiler and chiller addition to a school that had only electric heat. So built a little model of how a boiler and chiller work, and took it out and to one of their open houses, and people could come around and ask questions and see a little model of how that worked. And it really helps the community be involved and support these kind of projects. This is the A to Z committee, the community presenting to other community members what the plans were and what their findings were. We find that when we go to a project, we want to make sure we have a capitalization of potential, so that we're not over creating an abundance of contingency. So we're taking away from other projects that could happen, but that we have the right amount of contingency. And that happens by this historical knowledge of what we've done and what it costs to do projects. Have the reserve amount, make sure that our design maturity scopes are at the right level before we go to put funding to it, so we know that we're not missing things. Create a good timeline of how this project is going to go, whether it's over a summer or a Christmas break or a 2-year project, and what that looks like, engaging the stakeholders along the way. We try to get good cost estimates. We have, again, this goes back to having good partners that we can trust to give us their historical knowledge of what these kind of projects will cost. And we know that, most of our projects, as Scott mentioned, being older schools, are going to be remodels. There's not a lot of new construction going on as far as new school buildings. Of course, there's new things going on around the buildings, but most of our stuff is remodel. So we've tried to do as much documentation as we can on those past projects, where we can now use that data and information to inform our new projects. As built, whenever possible, I would encourage you. This is all, of course, funding is the fuel, right? That helps us to do what we need to do. But we try to digitize as many of these older plans, these blueprints and stuff that we can, so they're easier to get our hands on, they're easy to look at, they're easier to share, and it helps us in the long run to get a better cost estimate product. And to understand that Murphy's Law is well in play during these projects, that if you tear open buildings, you're gonna find stuff you just didn't know was there. But we have tried to do a good job of building that reserve, that contingency, so that it's a lot easier to get support for when you have the contingency there on something that is a need rather than something that is a mistake. So going back to our project here for the middle school, we found as they tore into walls, there was old electrical panels hidden, old wiring. So we had enough contingency that we could present. We had the contingency here. Now it's going to be a board decision. Do you want to upgrade these things? So we find sometimes Murphy's Law works as a benefit, where you can take these things that were deficiencies and pull them into the project, as Scott said, and use them for, in this school, it's all new electrical, all new panels, almost all new plumbing. Again, not a decision made that we had to say, go to the board for more money, but that it was, we had planned for things like this. Prioritizing the maintenance, where to start. Types of safety, environmental performance, integrity, ADA needs, which buildings. This is what we go by. Fire, flood, blood, safety, and security. If any of those things are a priority, we will literally drop what we're doing, send all the necessary manpower, if you will, to that site and take care of this emergency, so to speak. Then we go to a genuine need. Not everything is, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So we list these start with the work order system that's submitted through the facilities department, and anything that can't be turned around in a couple of weeks, we move to a project and message that to the sites that they know where they're living. If it's worth noting, it's worth prioritizing, is kind of what we live by. If we don't just make a list just to make a list, but we want to track those things. And then we go to a want or a nice to have, which a lot of times involves partnering with the PTO or different community members who want to help out build a track, say, or put a new playground in. So those aren't necessarily things that there's so many needs that it's hard to get to the wants list a lot of times. So this is just a snip of a master project list. This is one of our sites and a couple other, one of the schools and a couple other sites. But this is, if the work order leaves our system, it goes onto this list. Anything in blue is something we're working on, been prioritized by the school, by their input. And the things down below that are in white are just things that we said, we hear you, here it is. If you want to move number 15 up to number 1, that's up to you. And these are things we can track as capital projects for later when we get the funding, or we come into the capital project nomination process. These things are easy to find again. So long range facilities planning, we have a 20-year plan. I run off a 1-year, 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year plan. But as you know, as facilities managers and administrators, that every 5 years, that 20-year plan needs to be revamped, because it just doesn't, things change so much in our buildings that it's hard to say 20 years from now, we're going to do this. And that's what happens 20 years from now. Population's changing. Our community here is moving from one side of the city to another. So that plays into it. I'm constantly assessing what is happening within the community, and the demographics and all the things that play into how we spend our money and where it's going to go. And then again, this project tracker is very, I kind of live there. That's my living document of how I operate. And then we go to that capital nomination process that I talked about earlier. in this running list of needs and projects in the ready. So we had it during the ESSER funding, where our accounting offices say, hey, we need to spend X amount of dollars. And I had a list of enough things to double it, so always those little projects in the ready. So I'm thinking that these findings that we're going to get from ODE, we'll be able to plug right into these and into these project and prioritized lists. This is a capital projects tracker from this fiscal year. What you don't see, and I can't highlight here, is every one of these red squares or triangles is that list of tracking of the budget. So every one of these, I know pretty much up to date what we spent on this project. And if I get asked by a school board member or the superintendent or community member, I can quickly pull up, yeah, we spent $44,000 and we have $45,000 on the project. And here's where all the money has been spent. We want to be as transparent as possible, and letting the community members, the board members, anyone who asks really into our way of thinking. Creative financing, we did this. The middle school was through full faith in credit bonds. We didn't have to go out for community support for this $40 million project. We used these full faith bonds. We used some ESSER funds. We had part of an SRG grant that we used to do all this work. Sometimes there, as I said, there's donations. We had a big donation for a new field at one of our football stadiums. Just different funding sources that we use, and try to be creative sometimes when the funding isn't there. We always have these running list of bond considerations coming up for the next bond. We want to run the bond through its cycle, but not let it fall away and then have to add a bond to it, or go out for another bond, but try to keep that status quo cycle of when the bond's about to run out, we'd ask for another one so that taxpayers aren't adding, but they're just kind of maintaining. So that's it for me. Any questions? Hopefully that's what you had in mind, Sarah.
It is. Thank you very much. I think you gave a lot of things to consider. If anyone, time for questions?
It's like a good project, right? Ahead of schedule.
Great.
Sarah, if I may, I'm not seeing any questions being asked. I just want to take a moment, and I really want to be complimentary to ODE. I've been involved in this program since prior to it being passed as a Senate bill. And I think ODE, you can say what you want about some of the other sort of instructional side of the house. I know that comes up, but certainly from the facility side, I think the Oregon Department of Education has done a wonderful job of not just kind of getting into the mix and helping to address the need, but I think also the intention of being responsive to the need. So again, I want to be very complimentary to the Department of Ed and supporting K-12, navigating through this process of trying to get their hands around the need, quantifying the need, and then determining a strategy to kind of address those needs. So kudos to ODE for helping to support districts in this process.
Thank you. Even if you don't have any questions, would anybody like to share what has worked for them with prioritizing maintenance to share to the group so that everyone can have a chance to learn? And if you have trouble coming off mute, let me know when I can help you out. Go ahead, Phil.
Yes, I work for a small little district up in the mountains of North Jackson County, Butte Falls. We have about 140 kids. And when I came here, we had a budget balance of $20,000, ending fund balance. And so through all COVID and everything, we've worked really hard with our funding, and we've tried to create reserve accounts that are named specifically for what they are. And part of that comes from the language around dealing with maintenance. And I appreciate the previous presentation because if you can line out a 20 or 25-year facilities plan and you know you have expenses for roofs and things like that, it's easier to justify having reserves set aside where you every year you put money in that account so that you can take care of those. I don't think that the legislature always appreciates that many small districts have met their bonding capacity. And so in doing that, if you're able to, it helps if you're growing a little, then you can attend to those. But I will also tell you what has saved our bacon has been the seismic grants, because we were able to get 2 seismic grants for our 2 campuses of our school. And in the process of doing the upgrades, I got new roofs. And of course, if you aren't taking care of your roofs, then you're basically jeopardizing everything else. So that's kind of been our strategy the last 8.5 years here to at least get a handle on things. We have a lot of stuff that I'm sure that's buried in the walls from previous, patch and move on type things. I also would say the other concern I have is the health and safety one around lead paint and asbestos in old buildings, because many times it gets encapsulated, but eventually it ends up coming back at you. And so, as future funding based on the data we collect, I think that's a real big factor for improving the health. And I'm not thinking just of students, it's the employees who are in those buildings for many years. So that's my contribution of sort of how we've approached it here.
Thank you very much for sharing. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, no, I appreciated Phil raising his hand to comment on that. Phil, I concur with that. I wanted to take a quick moment. I was just looking at Jaron Ricks's comment and your response, Sarah, about posting those reports. I do think it's very much up to the district. The notion of transparency, right? Especially in a long-range master plan, we typically advocate that a district set up a separate, if you've gone through an assessment process and you are preparing to jump into the fray, if you will, and start a community bond advisory committee or a long-range master plan process, you would be best to err on the side of caution and put more information out there than you think people are actually looking at. And I've done a lot of work, particularly in, I would say, more rural, and I'll just say conservative parts of the state, where there's a lot of just maybe general lack of faith and transparency for public agencies. And I think that if a public school in particular can just put information out there, but make sure that you look at it with a somewhat critical eye. And part of it, Phil's comment about hazardous materials being a portion of that, lead paint, make sure that before you put anything like that out there, that you've got a good game plan to address those concerns. Because some of that information, lead paint is a great example of that. If you put it out there, then you better be able to say what you're doing about it. So just ensure that if information you're putting forward, that you've got, if there's hazardous materials in the mix, what's your game plan to address that? If there's significant deficiencies that report calls out, and I think to Andy and Phil's comment about budgeting for that, then at least I think it gives an opportunity for a district to say, hey, look, here it is, warts and all. But here's what we're doing to take steps to address it, either through, as Andy noted, building a long-range plan to kind of address those through the course of your normal budget process, or potentially if you are interested or in a position to pursue a potential bond program, you can say, look at this wealth of need here. Now, one of the items, and I think Andy spoke to it, but also the deferred maintenance, that can be a mixed bag about utilizing bond dollars for what some members of your public may consider to be deferred maintenance or maintenance items. But again, it just goes back to the transparency to how you build your budget. And as Phil alluded to, if you have an ending fund balance of $20,000, you know that you don't have a lot of money in the kitty to be addressing some of those, deferred maintenance items. So again, just be thoughtful about, I'm a huge proponent of transparency, but just with the intention of letting the district sort of craft the narrative of here's the information, we're putting it forward, but also here's what we're doing as a result of it to demonstrate to the public that we're looking out for, best use of tax dollars and protecting the asset, but also B, that we're looking out for your students, your kiddos, right? They're in our buildings every day. We identified these deficiencies. Here's the steps we're doing to kind of promote and encourage the learning environment.
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, kind of to go with that, we always try to keep, I mean, it seems, well, it seems common sense, I guess, but we try to do our best to know our buildings really well. So when there are these, for instance, we were submitting for or we were awarded a seismic grant, and within that grant, as Phil mentioned, there are some ADA deficiencies in a couple of restrooms. That was on a project for next year, but because we can wrap it into this grant, we want to take advantage of those opportunities to pick up on little bits and pieces we can that will wrap into those financed, those grant funded projects.
Yes. Thank you. Would anyone else like to share? Great. Adam, I have a few more things. So in communicating those reports, we realized that those reports are sometimes 70 to 100 pages long, depending on how many buildings you have at each campus. So handing that over to the public and saying, understand this would be very difficult. So Adam and I are working on trying to create a 1 or 2 pager so that you can have something easily to hand out to your community. We don't have that completed yet. It's a work in progress, but we'll be able to request those if you'd like to have them. And so if you have any thoughts if that would be helpful, let us know. And we're working on that. Adam, do you want to discuss what you're trying to put on there?
So we're trying to summarize the 1 to 2 pager report and condense down all of your reports. I know this doesn't really pertain to necessarily the smaller school districts that maybe just have 1 or 2 schools, but we really want to roll all of that information up to a district level and kind of condense it so it's more consumable for your board members and maybe your superintendents and things like that. Because obviously some of these reports are 50 or 60 pages long. And so we want to try to really touch on the key points of, maybe talking about your top 5 highest, costs for those systems at that higher system level that Scott was talking about, your electrical, your plumbing, your HVAC. We kind of want to prioritize those for you in a report, talk about, what schools are those at, look at like a 3, 5, 8 year, some graphs that, so you can do plan budgetary wise as far as over the biennium or the following bienniums. Yeah, and we'd love feedback on that as well. What's important to you guys, what's important to your board members. So if you guys could give us some feedback on how we can develop those reports, that would be super helpful. That's all I got.
Thank you. I'm going to see here. Scott, do you have any comments about communicating reports to your board?
Well, I'll just say, speaking as a board member, board should be policy governance, right? So I think to some extent crafting it that it is intended for its audience, right? I think I appreciate Andy's comment about the blood and some of the other analogies, right? Those that are student and life safety, right? I think those are items that a board's going to take a greater sense of sort of attention to. And then also, what do we do to address it? So I think fire life safety are those first concerns, but also with the intentionality of like, I'll just speak as a board member. Now that we've identified these issues, what are we doing from here? And I think Andy did a wonderful job of kind of summarizing how a facilities director or a facilities manager sort of collects this data, and then in particular, where do they go with it? So how are they prioritizing it? That fire life safety items being urgent, and sort of addressing those as quickly as is available. But also then those other items, like where are you going with that? And I think to Phil's comment about the ending fund balance, that to me is that would be a concern, right? Like, oh man, we're down to this. We do need to invest in that. So, even at a smaller district such as Athena Weston, what are we doing for our capital projects? How are we budgeting for that? What data are we collecting that isn't, the immediate fire life safety need? But roofing is a great example of that, paving or some of those other elements that may have some ADA component to it. And then kind of folding that into a longer term master, kind of that capital projects budget where we have a separate subcommittee of the board that is 3 board members. So we have a 7-person board, so it's not a quorum. Our superintendent, facilities director, and business manager. And so we meet a couple times a year, 4 times, roughly once a quarter to go through those. But it's, again, we try to stay focused on the board being in its lane, policy and governance, and their one administrator. So, we set our policies and our governance, but we also, of course, have the responsibility for the budget. So I try to ensure that as a board member, I am being kind of provided information, I'm staying in my lane, and then sort of what is my response that stays in alignment with that of the board. And that is relying upon our subject matter experts, our building administrators, our facilities manager to give us guidance on how we should invest those dollars, and then having a thoughtful discussion. So having that facility subcommittee at the board level helps kind of have maybe a bit more of a in the weeds conversation than you would have at a regular board meeting. But it also is with the intention that our facilities manager and our superintendent are presenting this and making recommendations. And then the board is sort of in a position to say, okay, I understand that. But I try to ensure that the board is very much kept in their lane where they can add value, and then they don't overstep their role and get further into the operational side of the house. But I guess I would also be curious, maybe from Andy's lens, somebody that's clearly presented to their respective board, is there any frustrations you have? I guess I wouldn't want to put you on the spot like that. But, from your lens, does the board stay in its lane, or does it have a tendency to kind of jump more into the operational side when presented with some of this information?
Our board typically trusts us to have done our homework and present them with good information, and we've been pretty successful at that. We haven't had any questionable projects, or we just continue to build trust. I think that helps to do your homework, have good partners, and be transparent.
Well said. So I guess, Sarah, as a board member, I appreciate Andy's response, because that's kind of very much what I'm looking for, right? Coming in, prepared for data, able to address those, hey, here are the items that we've identified as a need. Here's what our proposal is. Again, with the concept of, is it fire life safety? Is it that sense of urgency? Then, by all means, let's figure that out and address it. But if it's something, a mechanical replacement or something like that, oh, are we budgeting for that? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. That to me is really kind of keeping the board in its lane so that it can be successful and focused on its role, and then your administrators in a similar capacity.
Yeah, I think that it helps to be as well informed as you can be when you're presenting these projects, because there are questions, and if you can answer the questions and, like you have said, tell them where you're going and what the reasoning behind these decisions, then the questions are usually pretty minimal.
I think Andy, I think you addressed pretty much everything. Was there anything else you wanted to add with talking with the community? Okay. So I think one of the things that came up during the surveys that you gave me on reading the reports and what do we do with these reports is, how do we talk about when we have educational needs, like say classroom sizes versus sports needs versus something we can't see that our dollars are going to be going to, like electrical or plumbing. So how do you communicate these two the community that, hey, we just spent a lot of money on nothing that you're going to see helping out the, supposedly helping out the students, because they can't see it, even though it is helping the students.
Is that a question for me?
That is for you, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it helps to have these to invite the community to these projects and walk them through. Most of our seismic work, a huge percentage of the project of that $40 million, you can't see now. So to invite them in and help them to be our advocates and go into the rest of the community and say, you know, I went and saw it with my own eyes. Boy, there's tons of concrete and rebar behind those walls and shear panels and all that they did to take advantage of the opportunity while the walls were open to pull new electrical wires. Show pictures. We update our pictures, our projects on our website so that people can see the progress on our social media pages. I'm just engaging as much as try to get ahead of the questions, I guess.
So do you invite the public in while it's underway, while the construction is going on?
Yeah, we had safety vests, provided hard hats, and took them through during construction while the workers were in there nailing and pouring concrete, and created a safe path and walked through right during the middle of construction. So yeah, we got great feedback. I mean, there was people, we found wallets that were under the floor from the 1960s, and it was a big social media thing. We linked that item up with the original owner, and just things to make it, you know, something besides just a project that's happening that they don't know anything about.
Scott?
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating, actually, Andy. So that's pretty fun. I know Phil raised his hand as well, so I'll try to be brief. But I think one of the items, again, to me, it's all about education, right? Like, these are public facilities with the intention of, you know, improving student outcomes for students. So to the comment, particularly, I think about some significant infrastructure upgrades, electrical, mechanical in particular. You know, to me, that has a direct correlation back to the learning environment, right? If we're having to upgrade electrical infrastructure and spend $1 million on upgrading our electrical service so that we can add air conditioning, it's because we want to ensure that come 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a hot May day, that our kiddos are staying awake and attentive after recess, right? So I do think there are ways that certainly as a board member, but also as a just general community member, how do you tie back these investments in a K-12 facility back to instruction? And I think that is, it's not always just, oh, we're going to upgrade our electrical gear. We're upgrading our electrical gear to do why, right? And I think in particular, just the ability to kind of tie that back. And then in addition, finally, I'll, you know, to Andy's comment about getting the public in, you know, you can do a lot with just cameras now and just providing a camera. I was just down in Baker the other day. Baker Schools built a new cafeteria adjacent to their historic middle school, and they ran a construction camera all day long for the whole length of the project. And at the end of it, I believe it was their high school program, stitched all that together and had just a slideshow that ran that showed the construction progress. So I think there's some neat ways to get people into your community or into your project to give them visibility to that that are fairly unobtrusive. But thank you.
Thanks. Go ahead, Dr. Long.
I would add to that, when we did our seismic upgrades, which we're clearly dealing with an issue, we actually self-performed some of the work, particularly painting, and we had volunteers who came along. So there aren't a lot of reasons for people to be in schools, but anytime you can find a fairly safe way to have people come and put some sweat equity in, they have some ownership in it. During the pandemic, we also, our employees painted our city's community hall because we're going to use it for a classroom. So I think the message we really tried to push out there is that any resources that come to the district for capital improvements are resources that are coming to our community to enrich our community and make it a better place for everyone. But having reasons for people to actually be in the space and doing some sweat, I know there's some potential risk with that, but some sweat equity, that those people really were connected with our improvements.
You have some, both of you have some really excellent ideas. Go ahead, Andy.
I see that question. I think it's for me from Jaron. about suggestion on the summary, how calculable it is. And we do provide, say on high dollar items, tracks, playing fields, turf fields, suggestions to the accounting office and the school board that we need to be setting aside. We know it's going to cost $1.5 million to replace that in 8 years. So a recommended amount to set aside every year so that when that comes along, we're not trying to dig into reserves, but that money's been set aside. We do the same thing for roofs. We do the same thing with our PTOs, who a lot of times fund surface tracks at an elementary school. And we tell them part of their agreement in that project is that they put aside, invest in an account, $3,500 or $5,000, whatever it is per year, because in a few years that's going to need to be resurfaced. So we try to have a handle on those budget items and what they're going to be over 5 or 10 or 20 years, and make sure that we're setting aside the money so that we're ready for it when the project comes along.
That's great planning. Thank you. Okay. This last part here is from Adam. We had some concerns about what is ODE going to do with all this data we're collecting. So go ahead, Adam.
Okay, so currently there are no rules or statutes that authorize the Department of Education to enforce any school district to make these changes that are found in the reports, either the ADA or the FCA. So we just want to give you guys some reassurance that ODE will not be coming down on you to, this isn't an unfunded mandate. The actual intentions of this is to gather this information so we can answer questions from legislators on what is the need and where is the need, are probably the two big questions that we're going to be answering with this. And so some of the ways we're going to be communicating that with the policymakers is through internal dashboards. So we'll be taking all of the statewide data and drilling down to, again, what is the need? And that may be, or we're looking at roofs, or we're looking at fire life safety issues. It really will depend. During COVID, it was HVAC systems and filtration systems. And so whatever the hot topic is in the next legislative session, we're going to try to hope to answer that with some of this data that we're collecting. We will have some external dashboards that will be based more on regionality or school type, maybe based on like ESD regions. We are not going to be sharing school level or specific district level data at this time. We understand that there has been concern of what the optics are on, if this information is out there, we want to keep it contained so that you guys can tell that story with your school board members and your community members, because you have that more personal relationship and understanding of your facilities and why they are the way they are, where those priorities lie. Your school board may prioritize roofs, and so all your roofs are in great shape, but the siding is falling apart or something like that, just as an example. And so we don't want to draw a negative light on those things. We want you guys to have those conversations, but we will have an external dashboard to help kind of paint a picture, if you will, of those bigger, larger area needs in different regions of the state. We're not quite sure what that's going to look like yet. We don't have actual staffing to develop that, those dashboards. So, and the other caveat is that this is going to take probably another 1.5 years or so to gather all of this data. So it's going to take some more time to finish the rest of the state. We've been at it for about six months or so now. And so just keep that in mind that, this is going to take us some time. So if you guys are wondering a few months from now, where's this information at? How come I haven't been assessed or whatnot? It's just, there's just a lot of buildings in the state, and it takes some time. So bear with us. But again, we want to work on this together with you guys. We really appreciate any feedback, information you can give us. Give us some guidance on what is going to be beneficial for you, for tools that you can use for such as these dashboards. How or what information do you want to see in there to help tell your story? And that way we can help develop that so it is beneficial for you. What is ODE going to do with this data? I kind of already answered that. So we're going to have a statewide data set. And so we'll be able to do those cross-district comparisons, regional comparisons, school level comparisons. We're going to be able to look at all of those systems to see, again, where is the need, being able to budget across a multi-year of data and see, so that way we can budget out when we are asking the legislators for additional funding for you guys. My hope and my goal is to show legislators this data and have them commit to a specific facility grant for you guys to tap into to maintain your facilities. That does not require you to pass a bond or have some other requirement of you. It would be more of a reimbursement basis type thing. So that's my hope and dream. Again, it's going to be a while till we get to that point, but that's what we got. So, Scott, I know your hand's raised.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And I guess just maybe for the sake of the other attendees here, I circle back to ODE and want to be complimentary. In a former life, I was the I was past president of the Oregon School Boards Association. So I had the pleasure of serving on the board for the Oregon School Boards for almost 9 years, including as president. I had a lot of conversations with Senator Dembro when he was the Senate Education Committee chair, and a lot of polite back and forth with the senator about needing to increase the pot of money, Adam, to your comment, right? To the Awesome Grant, make these other funds available, particularly for districts that are in areas, as Andy alluded to, that have challenges passing bonds. And so I had a lot of good conversations with the senator as a result of that. And his immediate pushback was always, show me the data, right? Like, we as a state legislature, we're willing to support it, but you don't have enough data for the state to kind of say, okay, we see what the issue is here, or how can we best support it financially? So there was always this give and take, and I want to, again, be complimentary to ODE for sort of highlighting some of these challenges, but pulling this data together with the intentionality being to use it as leverage to help try to bring more money into the conversation to help do good work in our rural, particularly, I think, in those communities that have struggled to kind of pass bonds or get in front of it for a whole host of reasons. So again, thanks to ODE, but I am excited about this data being collected. With the intentionality being that I know long-term it'll hopefully help create a round of investment from the state legislature to help support our schools. So thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. Okay. So I just want to quickly let everyone know what I'm up to. So I am planning on having probably 5 more of these webinars over time. The next one probably will be late winter, early spring. And so I've been working on the SASI grant, and part of it is filling out those need surveys, and I've had them all go out, and they'll be going out again, but based on those is what I'm doing the webinars on. And one of the things will be funding, another one will be contractors and how to get them. So talking about funding, I'm trying to do a quick little summary. I have not delved into it yet, but on the SASI website, which I just put the link in the chat, I am going to post this webinar on there. I also have some federal funding links. So the first link is to what's called NICSI, which is the National Council of School Infrastructure, I believe. It's also part of the SASI grant. And on there, they do have some federal opportunities. I also have a link to the IRS Inflation Reduction Act tax breaks. So those energy incentives. So if you're interested in that. And then some links for some state funding. So the seismic grant is back open again right now. and it will be closing soon. So if you're interested in getting the seismic grant, there's a link to that on that website, as well as some green and Department of Forestry links for if you're working on landscaping on your campuses. So I'll have that available. And like I said, any other trainings and webinars, I'm going to try to keep this up to date and try to make it a facilities resource for everyone. Now, if we want to have an open discussion, though we have a very quiet group, we are curious how will everyone be using those reports? Is this information that we're giving you, is it useful? And are you planning on presenting it to your communities? So if anyone would like to jump in, you can go ahead.
I guess Sarah, just obviously I have the gift for gab. I'll keep chatting. We're just starting this process at Athena Weston. So similar to, I think, kind of the broader conversation, we have a Community Bond Advisory Committee, a CBAC, and the intention there is that they, we've done this process. We've had an outside group kind of come through, assess the buildings. And then it was sharing that data with our Community Bond Advisory Committee, and then walking them through the buildings after they had seen that data, so that they had kind of they had a narrative, they had some visibility, at least on paper, to what the issues were, and then walking them through all of the facilities after they had seen that and letting them really kind of see it and visualize it to make it far more tangible. And then they themselves can go out into the broader public and kind of speak to what they themselves saw, as opposed to the district or the board or our superintendent sharing that. It came from their own community members who had seen it firsthand. So appreciate the consideration, but again, I think that having the community be part of that process is a wonderful way of sort of delivering that information.
In Butte Falls, we're going to use it first to drive our long-range planning, facility planning, a little more to refine that. And then secondly, because we won't be able to pass a bond, it'll be a resource for pursuing grants, whether they're public funds or private funds. And to, as was described earlier, to already know some projects you need done and to be able to fold those into another project with a funding stream is really helpful. This is my last year as superintendent here, so I want to be able to hand off to a new superintendent the resources, the planning that would really help them pick up and move forward. It's always hard when you come to a new district to try to figure out what's what. So I think this is timely, and I'm grateful that the state is investing in small districts like this.
So I'm just curious, how did we do? Did you learn anything from this webinar? Please let us know. So I just sent a link out. It's a one question and it has little stars on it. You can do 1 through 6. How satisfied are you with this ODE training? Or you can just put it in the chat if you don't want to go on the link. So it's up to you if you want it to be anonymous or not. There's a spot also if you want to comment, please talk more about this or don't talk about that, whatever. Again, that's optional. I just need a 1 through 6 star rating for how I did, and that would be awesome. Thank you. And then lastly, thank you for coming. I really, really appreciate all of you attending and sharing. And I definitely appreciate Scott and Andy for presenting with me because they have a lot more knowledge than I ever could have. So thank you. And if you
I
have
second
any,
that. Thank you, Scott and Andy. Appreciate it.
Scott just put his email in the chat.
Yep. Sorry, I noticed there was just a spelling error in it there. So if anyone has any questions, glad to follow up offline. But again, I want to be complimentary to my colleagues, but Sarah and Adam, thanks for the opportunity to present and just speak to the group.
Thank you. So it's your opportunity to ask any questions before we go. Okay. Well, thank you. It's a somewhat okay Tuesday afternoon, and have a have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah,
Yes.
I do have one question for you. I have been working with Michael Lammers on coding our buildings. Apparently, our data for our district got wiped out of